What more, when you think about, can you say about someone who devotes his entire life to public service, to helping everyone less fortunate than him, never asking for anything in his life from anybody, just serving the people. I mean, it's a great calling.
Good evening. On behalf of the Los Angeles County Bar Association and many other local bar organizations, welcome to a night to remember our dear friend, Justice Paul Boland. I want to thank so many members of the committee, the members of the bar, and the judiciary who have come together tonight to celebrate the life and, most importantly, the legacy that Justice Boland has left for all of us. I would say if Paul had his way, he would, without question, object to our doing this.
He was somebody who never wanted to have the attention focused on himself, but rather on others, when it was he, Paul, who really merited the kudos for so many of the things that he was involved in. But we will overrule his objection and do so.
First knew Paul in 1969 when I was at UCLA and he was a young professor, having just founded UCLA's clinical law program with Paul Bergman and David Binder. And he was a professor of mine. I took a class from him, and he was as smart and wise then as he was throughout his legal career.
I first met Paul when I was in law school at UCLA, and he was a professor there in the clinical program. He was such a fun professor. He also looked so young, it was impossible to believe he was actually a professor and not one of us.
I was a law student at UCLA in 1977 through 1980, and Paul was my trial ad professor, and we began a relationship that lasted 30 years.
As a teacher, he was just simply fabulous and second to none. The students loved him, and they loved him for the right reasons. He was a superb teacher. He was calm, as he always was, patient, hardworking.
Many of the jobs I've had in the Superior Court, from being the head of complex to being the head of civil here, all were preceded by lunches with Paul Boland, in which I asked Paul what he thought I ought to do. And he always gave me great advice, and I always followed it.
He was intelligent, as we all know, hugely intelligent, hugely personable. I always loved him because he had that voice that sounded like the voice of God every time he spoke, so I always sat up and listened to everything he said.
Whether it was for plaintiffs or defendants, he had a sense of fairness, and he didn't want to just help the people in his courtroom. He always reached out to help everyone.
Everybody who met him or got to know him had been profoundly affected by him and by what he was able to say. And it was not only his sage-like quality, but the way he made you feel about yourself.
What he said really resonated. Whenever you got a letter from him, it was directly on point as to your personal life and the lives of others, because he cared about other people so much.
Paul had just made such an impression in his work at UCLA and his work down at the Juvenile Court, his work with the judges of the Superior Court. Everyone welcomed him.
Paul had this incredible ability to sort of nurture the private dreams and hopes of law students, all across the country. I came in at a time when Paul Boland had actually just taken over the externship program at the Court of Appeal, and he really opened the doors to law students from so many different underserved communities and turned that program into the type of program that represented the community that it was serving. Really made it something special.
He was very, very concerned with and devoted to bringing new people, new kinds of people into the legal profession. He was very devoted to diversity in the law, to opening it up, both legal education and access to the court, to opening up the legal process.
Even though the externs were assigned to us individually, they felt that he was their personal mentor. They went to him with their problems, they went to him with their career questions, he helped them find jobs. Every single one of them felt that they were the special extern for him.
I watched him in the dependency court where people come in to the court in the most dire of circumstances. They're losing their children. They're many times for circumstances they can't control. They're drug addicts, they're homeless. He had a common man approach to those people. It was just incredible. They just felt like they were talking to another human being. And that's a difficult thing for judges to learn how to do. In fact, I don't think you can teach judges to do that. I think judges either have that capacity or they don't, and Paul exemplified that. I mean, he was amazing on the bench.
He was the epitome of balance. That's who he was. And, you know, more than that, he was balanced with courage. And I just don't think you could ask for anything more in somebody with the great responsibilities that he had.
I really don't think that I would ever have considered myself as someone who could become a litigator, but for Paul.
I don't think I've ever met a more beautiful man. And there was something so unbelievably giving about him.
It's important that when we remember Paul, we remember not only his serious qualities, but his fun-loving qualities as well.
Something with the hands, yes, 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 and the twinkle in his eye and the clearing of his throat, that's right, that's right.
And then he would cover and sort of in mock horror slap his cheek. When we first got appointed and the division was new, the walls outside here were a little unfinished. And they hadn't had their final coat of paint, if I recall correctly. But in any event, Judy Ashmann, who was appointed around the same time in Division 2, she got her nameplate, her brown nameplate on the side of the wall before we did. And we were understandably offended by this favoritism by the general services people. So what could we do? So we took marks-a-lots and wrote on the walls with Paul Boland, Associate Justice, Lawrence Rubin, Associate Justice.
And early mornings, he would be out walking the dog, and I would inevitably run into him at least a couple of times a week. So we would walk together, the three of us, whether it happened to be Shamrock or their other dog, Molly.
Justice Boland would be here in shorts and a t-shirt walking Molly, and I'd look at him and ask him if he needed to be institutionalized for being out here in 35-degree weather walking his dog. And he'd just smile and he'd wave and we'd talk for a couple of minutes and I'd roll up the window and go to the gym.
There were an awful lot of good judges I had the honor of appointing or elevating. But I always told my Judicial Affairs Secretary, look for people who are engaged in the community. You know, I appointed my share of sort of ivory tower academics. I appointed my share of prosecutors. I appointed my share of public defenders. But what I really relished was the opportunity to either elevate or appoint someone who spent time mentoring, spent time with young people, spent time improving the lives of the people he or she encounters above and beyond what their day job requires. And Judge Paul Boland, both as a professor at UCLA, in his capacity as a member of the Judicial Council, and in many other capacities, found ways to engage young people in real-life experiences. There were programs that Paul inaugurated which had students actually working in real-life trials with real-life lawyers.
Well, I've known Paul for years that go back before he was first on the bench, when he was an outstanding professor at UCLA Law School in charge of the clinical legal education program. And of course, I've maintained a friendship and a professional relationship with him through many, many years of his exemplary service as a trial court judge, a Court of Appeal justice. He left a wonderful legacy of scholarly opinions. But also at the California Judges Association, his wise counsel is something that has guided many others in that position. And he's just been an outstanding person who has shown a real commitment to the improvement of the administration of justice in our state.
He would want each of us to pick up a piece of his life and mentor law students, help other people, and really serve justice.
Paul was always genuine and himself in every interaction I ever had with him, was always interested in me as a person as well as me as president, and was someone who I always felt better for having been in that interaction with him. So he was a great man.
He seemed to have an inexhaustible amount of care and concern for every single person that touched his life.
I think that's what he was really devoted to, teaching as a way of opening up everyone's eyes and increasing everyone's interest in the legal profession and the principles that it stood for.
I feel that I've lost, like so many others feel they have lost, a great friend, but somebody who was also just an outstanding jurist and legal scholar.
Paul made it a point of touching the lives of his students, of his interns, of his clerks, of his colleagues, and we're all better off because he walked down our path.
I just miss him. I can't pick up the phone and call him and ask him out to lunch, and I miss that. And it's going to be a little while, Paul, before we get back together.
Who best deserves this kind of an honor to last the legacy than Paul, his child, Patrick, and his lovely wife, Margaret? I mean, they were the perfect couple, and it's just, who else than to have this memorial than Paul?